Hi, Principal Matters listeners. This is Will Parker back with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, for another Monday Matters. Jen, we're recording this at the beginning of October, but this episode will be live October the 13th, which means that, fall's here, just a few weeks away from Halloween. So before we jump into content, I just have to share that in our family, we're really excited because we have a daughter, Katie, who lives in Chicago, who's coming home this weekend. And so if all things work out, bonfire and fun and just time together. How are you doing in your sweet family?
Well, we're recording it right before I head out to Oregon to work with their rural principals for 3 days. So I'm really excited about that. And then I'll come home, and much like you, my son will be home for the weekend for his fall break. So both get my professional bucket filled and my personal one too.
I love that. I just returned from a conference with Apogee and School CEO, who've been sponsors of our show, and they do a lot of website support, social media tools, all kinds of branding and marketing supports for schools. And so they asked me to speak on my book, Messaging Matters, which is really all about just the importance of principals, for lack of a better word, branding. Mm-hmm. Right. With students and with teachers and with their community members. But I wanted to bring this conversation to Principal Matters listeners today for this Monday Matters episode. I like to call it left brain, right brain leadership. And I was actually in a group yesterday with some assistant principals from Kentucky, and I asked them this question. There's this really cool Mercedes-Benz ad that shows an image of a brain, and on the left side you have kind of black and white images of graphs and statistics, and on the right side you've got all this color and someone's dancing. And the point of the ad is, if you own our car, it satisfies all of you. Oh. And so when I look at that, I laugh, but then I think about, you can oversimplify this, but there are certain parts of your brain that are stimulated by statistics and process, and there are certain parts of your brain that are stimulated by passion and engagement. And so I just threw this question out to this group of assistant principals, since all of us have been teachers or observe a lot of teaching. What does it look like for a teacher to use both sides of their brain in instruction? And they gave me some really great feedback, Jen. In fact, I put it into 2 columns, and I shared this with you before today's show. And, they kind of broke it down into categories. On the left side, they said good teachers analyze data. They teach to standards. They have high rigor. They curriculum map. They align. They think about mastery. They're committed to process. They have structured classrooms for behavior and academic, priorities. And then on the right side of the brain, they have active learning and engage students in collaborative settings, and they facilitate inquiry. One of them said they have guided chaos. It may sound crazy, but it's happening for a reason. They're creative and expressive. They care about the whole child. And I love that because it's really easy for leaders to be able to identify how teachers are using both sides of their brains.
Right. I loved it when I previewed this document in these 2 columns. I was laughing to myself because I was thinking the very best teachers have both. They're able to do both. And I was thinking about a teacher I worked with. It's probably been 20 years, but she was left brain teaching all the way. And she struggled to understand why students didn't like her all that much because she was doing everything right. She had the data, she had the rigor, she was aligned, commitment to process. And I would think to myself, she's kind of the perfect teacher, but she doesn't have that engagement with students, allowing the moments of chaos and curiosity, the creativity. And on the other hand, I've known teachers who live too much, meaning all the way, in right brain teaching. They're fun and they're excited and they're applying those lessons to real life, but there's no plan.
Yep.
There's no process. There's no behavioral structures. So it really, you've got to find that sweet spot where you're able to dance between left and right.
Well, and the research backs that up. David Yeager was a guest on my show in 2024, and he wrote a really great book called 10 to 20, The Science of Motivating Young People. And really what he does is he takes some of Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset, but then he actually spent lots and lots of time. He's a psychologist now, a former middle school teacher who became a psychology professor.
Interesting.
And he spent time studying really highly effective teachers. What makes them so good? And he landed right where we're landing right now, that highly effective teachers have high expectations on the one hand, really high standards, and super high supports on the other. So they have that magic of both. When you step in here, the rigor is super, super high. And I will do anything humanly possible to help you get to that next level. And so, Jen, we both have been the recipients of as students, but also we've walked in schools with what I call the magic teacher. That person who's just like, I just want to be in this room all day long. And usually it's because both of those dynamics are happening at the same time.
And I wonder, you're going to connect some sources to the show notes, which is going to be really helpful for principals. I wonder if this might be a launching pad for talking with teachers about their classrooms. And, you could even say, I see your right brain on fire in this classroom. Here's all the wonderful things I see. Now, when we talk about our growth areas, I'm going to activate that left side of your brain. And so let me ask you some questions about that.
Yeah.
So it really could be a tool to have those difficult conversations with teachers if you see there's not balance. So listeners, look at the show notes. You'll find Will's thoughts there.
Yeah. Well, and I want to make another bridge, Jen, because this was an aha moment for me as a leader and actually I'll just go back in time. It was the year I was transitioning from AP to principal. And I was just wrestling with that transition and some of the new responsibilities that I had to be kind of on point for everything. I'm no longer just supporting the work of a principal. Now I'm supporting the work of my APs and my staff. And over that summer, and I didn't reference this in our notes, but I read a book by Dave Ramsey, who does a lot of financial stuff, called Entree Leadership. And it was his book about how he turned his company from entrepreneur into what he does today. And he's got a company in Nashville with probably 500 employees. And whether or not people are a fan of his, what I learned from that read was for every person he brings into his team, he gives them what he calls a list of key responsibility areas so that they know this is the main thing you're here to do. This is your thing. And this is how you're going to be measured in terms of performance. And I was reading that over a summer and I just took a step back and I thought, do I actually know what all the responsibility areas are of the people that I'm supposed to be, like my school registrar, my paraprofessionals, my counselors? So we started having conversations that school year where I would just sit down with different team members and say, tell me what you do. We started creating these lists of just shared documents that I had my own list of key responsibility areas. My APs had their own. My counselors did their by months. All my office staff did theirs. And the cool thing about it was we became really familiar with each other's key responsibility areas so that we could define what are our roles, but then individually, what are our roles? Right. And the aha moment for me, Jen, was if I could exercise the left brain part of my leadership, setting expectations, modeling behaviors, following policies, establishing structures, understanding data, then I could exercise the right brain side of my leadership, which is encouraging freedom and autonomy and openness in an environment where everyone has a voice and facilitating buy-in. And so I guess my question for listeners, and I'd love to hear you reflect on this too, Jen, is how do we apply left brain, right brain to our leadership?
Right. Well, I think that's a great question for our principals, and I'm going to admit something here. I think I was in about third or fourth grade when our art teacher, Mrs. Thompson was her name, and she talked about left brain, right brain. And I remember she had lists similar to what you have here. This is what your left brain does. This is what your right brain does. And I looked at the list and I was like, well, I'm going to remember this until I die, because I'm going to remember that the right brain, what happens there is the right thing. which tells you all that I am a right brain thinker. Like, let's talk about it. Let's get together. The whole child guided chaos. I thought all those people over on the left-handed brain side were boring, and that wasn't worth much. Well, I have come to find out that I desperately need to work on that left brain side, and I do. Like, we have talked about that a lot on this show, about how I have so embraced the value of systems and protocols and procedures, policies, because it counteracts the way I want to think, right? And this is exactly what you just said. You have to have both. And I think it's very helpful as a principal, but also as principals encouraging teachers to recognize what you think is right, meaning correct, and
Yeah.
then think about which is missing, the left-handed or the right-handed side of your
Yeah,
thinking.
that's so funny, Jen, because I remember my art teacher doing the same thing. They must have all been
Right.
teaching from the same curriculum. But I remember I was in high school though, when I first had that lesson taught to me by an art teacher. And I remember thinking too, oh yeah, I'm a right brain person.
Right.
And it's funny because right brain people tend to be expressive and communicative, and we both love to write and all those things. But it's probably because the left brain for me was it had to be a learned behavior.
That's
I
right.
had to, but that's the same thing I had to do as a teacher. I had to embrace process and procedure and structure so that I could have fun in teaching. And
Right.
so as I think about anyone listening to this today, I think leaders tend to lean one side or the other too. Sometimes you've got people that are very strong on their process and policy, and they're by the book, and that feel like you salute when you walk in, and then you've got other people that are all heart and they're all engagement and they just fly by the seat of their pants. And to me, the magic leader, like the magic teacher, is somebody who learns to embrace both.
Right.
Who learns
Right.
to really exercise both of those. Whichever area where you need to grow is probably there you need to focus.
Well, we've talked a lot about principals and their assistants. When you hire an assistant, don't hire yourself. Hire what you're not. And so in that sense, if you're someone who does lean left with your thinking, hire that right brain person and vice versa, so that you're not just hiring yourself. That will not make you better.
Yeah. So in the spirit of making sure that I'm not just being philosophical and being right brainy, I also wanted to just kind of wrap up with a resource from another guest that was on my show, Mark Schellinger. And I've followed Mark's work for a long time from the SAM National Innovation Project. In fact, I'm going to be keynoting at their national conference in January. But Mark has really been a mentor to me over time because he and I became friends when I was still a principal. And even though our school didn't adopt his model because they sell programs and training for principal time management, he was just so generous to me. He's like, well, I don't care if you buy it or not. Let me just show you what the research has taught us. And so these models have been so helpful in allowing principals some really particular strategies and on that left side so they can have more time for the right. So I'm going to just give 4 quick takeaways from what Mark always talks about. And anyone who wants to hear the full 35-minute conversation can, I'll put a link to the show with him. But number one, and again, this is not just Mark's tips. He works with, I don't want to just say hundreds, I'm going to say probably thousands now of leaders who have reshaped the way they lead so they can spend more time in instructional leadership. And so tip 1 he always gives is schedule your management and instructional tasks in advance. You and I have always talked about this. Like, show me your calendar,
Right.
and then you'll show me your priorities. So if you have an intention, I'm going to spend more time in classes, but you haven't actually placed that time on your calendar, it's not going to happen. That same AP group I was with 2 days ago, there's a brand new AP in that group, and she has already done, I wrote it down. I don't know if I can find it quickly. Oh, I guess I didn't write it down. It was something like 43 walkthroughs already since the beginning. Yeah,
Wow.
she's like, but I asked her, how, you're a brand new leader. How have you spent that much time in classrooms? And she said, it's on my calendar. I'm scheduling it in advance so that my day's built around that, not built around the fires. Number 2, Mark suggests have a follow-up meeting with someone you trust for accountability. Now, this took me a long time to start practicing this, but I actually, for Will, I started setting up weekly meetings with my site secretary every Tuesday morning at 9. I still remember this specifically, Jen, because we would not do it at the beginning of the day because that's when things are crazy. And we did do it on Mondays because things are always, crazy. But we always had this Tuesday time block where we'd sit down and go through our calendars. And she had permission to ask me, have you done the things that you've said? How can I help you? She holds me accountable. I've told you and listeners, I still practice this even in my work today because Emily, who's my full-time assistant, sits down with me every day and she asks me 4 questions. What are you supposed to be working on? Why are you not working on them? What commitments have you made that you need to follow up on? And how can I help? And so having someone on the other side of you gives you that whole nother layer. John Boyd, who's a principal at St. Genevieve High School, does this with he told me he does this with his site secretary every day. And so, and she has permission to open the door when he's getting like sucked into email and say, hey, John, don't forget you said you're going to be in this class second period. The third thing that Mark Schellinger recommends is create a first responder structure so that your school already has people can answer the questions so you don't have to answer it. Food, nutrition, transportation, parent information, all that, the go-tos. And then the fourth thing that he suggests is train people to use you the way you like to be used. People's behavior doesn't change if they can always pull you into a fire, but you can't train them how to put the fire out, then you're always going to get pulled into the fire. Yeah. And so sometimes that means literally sitting down, like I used to do this with our staff before the school year. We're going to practice how to answer the phone. We're going to practice how to manage a really hot parent. We're going to practice what to say in these situations. So Jen, I just wanted to leave some really practical tips for that left side, since that's not my strength, so that we can hopefully lean into that right side.
Right. And I think you and I are both examples, our English teacher selves, of forcing ourselves to learn that left side and embrace it and really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, what I love about these conversations is that we know that I don't like to call schools brands, even though we know we have to do marketing, because really what we are is learning communities. But but the same truth applies to both, that a good brand appeals to both sides of the brain and good learning communities do too.
Correct.
And so the question is, how are we committed to both the structures or the head part of our school communities, while also providing the supports, the heart part of what we do too? Because at the end of the day, when those two things are in balance, you have magic classrooms and you have magic school communities too.
I've realized how much when we podcast, I say right, because I should be saying left, or more accurately, I should be saying correct. So yes, I agree. That is correct. Well, thank you.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, we so appreciate you tuning in for this Monday Matters conversation. I'll on my website, williamdparker.com, you can see a link to today's show, and I will post just the notes that Jen and I have been using, just so you can see my feedback and any of the sources that I've referenced to as well. And Jen, as we wrap up, I know people can find all those resources at williamdparker.com, but they can also find your resources at your website, and they can sign up for your newsletter. Tell them about that.
That's correct. Yes. Just go to jenschwanke.com and click on newsletter, and you can subscribe. I'm having a lot of fun writing that and getting some great feedback too. So I've called it Principal Problems with Dr. Jen. So join me there.
Principal Matters listeners, thank you, Jen. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you for doing what matters. And we'll talk to you again soon.